On behalf of the Carmel Residents Association, the Board of Directors, and the citizens of Carmel-by-the-Sea, we'd like to welcome you to this evening's discussion. We'll introduce the panel in just a minute here, but before I do, what I'd like to do is recognize our elected officials that are in the audience this evening. If I could have you stand, and we will recognize you after you all stand up. First of all, Mayor Dave Potter, Councilperson Ferlito, Councilperson Grandma, Councilperson Barron, and Councilperson Richards. Please give them all a warm round of applause. We also have members of city staff here tonight as well. Chip Rarick, Maxine Gullo, and Marty Waffle. If you could all please stand and be recognized as well. And lastly, your CRA Board of Directors is well represented tonight as well. And I'd ask them all to stand and wave. And if you could give them a round of applause for all their volunteer work for the benefit of Carmel-by-the-Sea. Again, welcome. We've got a great program for you, and by way of introduction, we're going to keep it brief because it's a hot topic, or hot topics we're going to be talking about tonight. Please welcome Assemblywoman Addis, Senator Laird, and this evening program is going to be moderated by Paul Miller, the editor, owner, and publisher of the Carmel Pine Cone. Please welcome Paul. And Paul, with no further ado, I'm going to pass it to you.
Thank you, Graham, very much, and Ken for inviting me to do this. It's a great honor and a privilege, and I've got as Graham said, there's so much to cover and a very complicated subject. So I prepared just a few little comments I wanted to make at the outset. You know, just when I was discussing with Dawn and John before we walked out here, I was talking about the fact that there have been so many new housing bills that it's impossible even for an expert to keep track. And in fact, just the other day, Gavin Newsom sent out a press release trumpeting the fact that he'd signed 56 new housing bills. These are both housing and tenant protection. I think he did it on October 11th. And this is on top of all the ones that we've seen come down from Sacramento in the last few years. One of the brand new ones, when he did the press release, he called the housing shortage that we have in California something that has been decades in the making. And he said that the bills that he signed are a major step towards repairing the damage from that long-standing housing shortage. One of the brand new ones, one you may not know about, is SB 4, which, unless I'm wrong, I believe what it does is it allows a religious institution or independent institution of higher education to build a housing development project on their property by right. So we can see a couple of those in the Carmel area. Another one that he signed on October 11th is SB 423. This is the one the LA Times said recently could bring major changes to cities like Carmel-by-the-Sea. Major changes and the words major changes and Carmel-by-the-Sea don't really seem to go together. It requires local governments that are failing to meet their state housing goals to streamline affordable housing projects, and I believe it reduces coastal commission review of those projects, something also that we are very surprised to see. And then there's SB 9, which became law in 2023, a law that's known as the end of single-family zoning, that's what people call it, because it eliminates local control over various categories of lot splits in single-family communities, requires cities and counties to approve up to 2 new units on each lot. In other words, in many places, or in fact in very many places, where you have one house now, you'll get 4 new ones or apartments or what have you. Now, John and Dawn, I'm sure you understand that too. A great many people, especially in small communities like Carmel, not to mention Carmel Valley, Pacific Grove, Monterey, laws like these are such a drastic change from the anti-development sentiment that has long been one of the paramount legal principles in the state, particularly along the coast. So much so that people now are having a hard time even believing that this is the reality that we're living with now. After hearing so much over the years from state officials about what a special place Carmel is, and I think you could quote about 100 Coastal Commission staff reports warning about changes in Carmel and talking about how important it is to prevent them. All this new legislation has people wondering what happened to that. What happened to the special status of places like Carmel? Now, John, you're from Santa Cruz, and Dawn, you're from Morro Bay, so you're familiar with these kind of problems. With that in mind, I think we have to look at tonight's questions in three broad areas. First of all, most people recognize there's a major housing shortage in California, but why did Sacramento, by enacting bills such as SB 4, SB 9, and SB 423, decide to solve the housing shortage by short-circuiting, if not eliminating, land use and zoning policies and public review at the local level, and also by removing many of the protections of CEQA and the Coastal Act. So that's the first broad area, why they do this, and why they do it this way. Secondly, many people want to know about the specific policies in the new legislation, such as the aforementioned lot splits, drastically eliminating or reducing local control over development projects that until just the other day would have been unthinkable. And thirdly, where's the infrastructure going to come from to support all this new housing and the people who will live in it? Okay, first question. I'm sorry, you guys get to make opening statements. I'm sorry, I almost forgot that. Please, so that's my preamble, so you guys go ahead and you can speak from where you're sitting. Sure, that's what you should do. Who wants to go first, Dawn?
I'd be happy to, but first and foremost, I want to say thank you to the Carmel Residents Association. Last time I was with you, I had the great honor of honoring Donna Jett as your Citizen of the Year, and so that was a really fun event. And so when I got this invitation, I was very happy to come back. It was such a welcoming atmosphere, and very proud to be here with my colleague, State Senator Laird. We have spent the entire day together almost, and this happens to us a lot. We go to a lot of places together, and it's just been such a pleasure to have such a great partnership. I would say we have very similar perspectives, not a lot of daylight between us when it comes to our love for the Central Coast, our desire to protect the Central Coast, and certainly the Senator has more experience than I do with this, but has been a wonderful mentor. And then want to thank the electeds here who have come out tonight, and all of you. This is an incredibly important conversation. One that I think we should all be invested in. Prior to being in the state legislature, I was a mom and a teacher. I grew up as a renter and now a homeowner, so I have sort of lived the gamut when it comes to housing, wanting to be a homeowner, wanting my kids to be able to own homes somewhere someday on the Central Coast, but then served on the Morro Bay City Council, where, you know, really my focus was local land use decisions and how are we going to get housing done in the way that fit for our community. And at that time, decided that we would make housing a major city goal of ours so that we could really put the time and energy that it takes into these important decisions. And we did get done, when I was on the city council, the very first 100% affordable, low income and very low income housing project in 30 years, but it took quite a bit of community input. We had to build consensus, and we did have quite a bit of local control in that situation. And so as I was reflecting on coming here tonight, many of the things that I've seen, the surveys from the Carmel Residents Association, things in the Pine Cone, which I'm a subscriber to the newsletter, really resonated for me in terms of my times on local government, and it's the perspective that I've brought to the state level conversation around housing, and have personally tried to be very targeted in my own approach to housing, have supported student housing at the community college level, bringing my own legislation forward for that, and supported senior housing through assistance for residential care facilities for the elderly and loan access. And so I've really been and then renter protections for folks that are living in mobile homes that really need a way to speak up about injustices. And so have tried to meld my experience from local government, from being a mom, from having lived on the Central Coast for a long time, and brought that to the legislature. So just really want to welcome the conversation and the questions tonight, and I'm honored to be here. So thank you for the invite.
It's wonderful to be able to have a chance to hear from you, honestly. John, you're a familiar figure around here, so please tell us what your perspective is on this issue.
Thank you. And I know we're going to get into a lot of questions and details and some of the specifics, and I thought it would be good to maybe make two sort of background points heading into it. And because I read the leaflets coming in, and there's clearly a question like, what are people thinking in Sacramento? And the debate has been set by the advocates of more housing that in fact we're 3 million units under meeting the demand in California, that people's kids can't live in the towns they were raised in, that there are certain places where teachers, first responders, people that are just rank and file public works employees can't afford to live in the towns they worked near. And then even coming back from the pandemic, service employees were really hard to get, and there are real limits in doing it, and that it needs to be addressed at the state level because it's not happening. And then you go to the districts that Dawn and I have, and Dawn's district is fully contained in my Senate district. I overlap with 3 other assembly members, but Dawn is the one that is there. And our districts are really different. So right now, even though my district will change by 300,000 people next year when the Senate redistricting takes effect, right now I have 21 cities. And except for the small portion of San Jose, Santa Cruz is the next largest of the 21 cities at 60,000, and it goes down from there. And I spend a lot of time in in the legislature saying to a colleague, that's very urban-centric of you, because a lot of the bills are designed to address the problems that they see in the urban areas, which aren't these areas. And even though some of this would come up in questions, I mean, I think the major housing bills in the last 5 or 6 years, and I'm in my 3rd year of being back, and Dawn's in her 1st year, some of them happened before we came back, are introduced by people from San Francisco or the East Bay or Los Angeles or San Diego. And yet they apply to all cities. And I was in San Luis Obispo, which is in my district, at a housing forum. And one of the legislators said, I think it's a false issue to say there's no infrastructure. You build the housing and infrastructure will follow. And I took that colleague aside later and said, spoken like somebody with unlimited hetchy water, because it is really different. And so I have to look at these through the light of, can I leverage them some toward the way? Do I occasionally vote for them because I've successfully leveraged them partway? Do I cast a protest vote? And there was a big one my 1st year, which was the one you didn't mention, SB 8, where I was one of the 8 senators to vote against it. And that bill would have allowed the city council or board of supervisors by a 2/3 vote to invalidate certain citizen-passed initiatives. And I said, that's just a bridge too far. We shouldn't do that. Well, I was one of 8 people that voted against that. And it passed. It got signed into law by the governor. And then there was one other one last year where I did something I don't recall ever having done before. I was the only person that voted no on a bill on the floor. And it was a bill that would have exempted housing projects, particularly at UC, but CSU was dragged into it, from CEQA. And my local experience was as a city council and mayor in Santa Cruz, and the university was housing a quarter of their students, and so it was coming into the local market to have to do it. And they're under the state constitution exempt from local land use. We sued them to no real avail, and the only access we had was through CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act. And through CEQA and various lawsuits, the University of Santa Cruz now houses 50% of their students on campus, and has said that they will not admit a new student unless there is a housing unit for them. And it has come from the local pressure that we've done that. So there's this bill last year that says housing projects on UC campuses will be exempt from CEQA. And I went to the author and said, that's the only reason we have housing in some of the university towns. And he said, well, the only people who are complaining are the people that represent university towns. I said, it's the only place it applies. Yeah. That is why. And so we go through these debates, and I think when we get asked a lot of questions tonight about what's black and white, and don't do this and do that, occasionally I make a decision to vote for a bill to leverage amendments, and it might not get exactly to where I want, but it moves it closer. And even though we're going to talk about it, 423, I really worked with the author and said, you have to do something about the coastal thing. And in the end, the Coastal Commission got an exemption for fire areas, for special habitat or environmentally sensitive areas that will take a lot of the coastal zone out of that. And the Coastal Commission actually went neutral on the bill. They made it really hard for us to decide there was still a stand to take because we leveraged that, and the Coastal Commission asked for those amendments. So as much as it would be nice to just be binary and black and white, some of these things are difficult because being outside an urban area, you can leverage them as much as you can and then hope for the best. Yeah. Anyway, I'll leave the rest to the question.
Well, I mean, I appreciate that because it's like they say, making slow, we don't want to see the way it's done. But we know that you, John, because we know you, that you have good intentions about the future of this area. And I think the people in the community do as well, obviously they do. So I don't think anybody came here to tar and feather anybody, but we just want to understand why these things were done and what they mean. So let me go back now to sort of a principle, or what Gavin Newsom was referring to when he said it's a decades in the making. California has a terrible housing shortage. What caused that? You want to speak about this first? What caused this housing shortage?
Well,
was it developers being too greedy, they didn't want to build apartments? Or was it because there was no capital available, or because there was no, what caused these buildings that should be there now not to be built in the first place?
I always think of it like you need, someone smarter than me said this to me actually, is that you need 4 things to build housing. You need the political will, you need the finance, you need the right policy, and you need a piece of land at all. And so, I don't think those 4 things have come together well enough over time in California. It can be a challenging place for a lot of people to build, especially coastal California. And
but isn't the reason it's so challenging because there's so many regulations, or there have been? Isn't that the reason it's been so challenging to build?
I think it can be part of the reason. I think we've also faced difficult economic times over the last number of years. We've had a lot of up and down in our economy. Right now we're facing a supply chain issue. We're facing an issue in the workforce where there's just simply not enough people in the workforce. And I think there's a lot of community concern at the moment. I am seeing, though, many projects start to come to fruition, many of which have been planned for a very long time and are just now getting built. And I think that, for someone like myself, one of the goals is that I want my kids to be able to live here. And I think people are starting to say, whoa, my children cannot live here. And so there's sort of a new attention on how we're going to get this done, if that makes sense.
But John, since you and I have been around longer than Dawn has, I'm going to go back to the 70s. And the reason that the Coastal Act and CEQA were passed was that local agencies were too pro-development. Isn't that right?
In part.
Well,
in part, but you see, the other half of being around for a long time, which is painful, is that I was on the city council from 1981 to 1990, 9 years. And at the time, the federal government had not pulled out of housing. And there was available land, and it was not extensive. And there were certain abilities to build that penciled it out. And there was actual cash to make certain units affordable. And so the one thing that might be some credence to what Gavin Newsom was saying is yes, there's been a lot of housing built, but it's been single family housing, and it's taken a lot of the land that isn't in a floodplain, isn't in a sensitive area, has infrastructure, and there's not been the incentives to build multifamily housing in certain locations that would probably do the greatest help to deal with the housing shortage. And so he, in some ways, is talking about making up for that. And it's tough because the building has happened. It's in a way that it's not like there's a lot of excess land. I mean, the place that there really is, and this is a controversial view of the legislature, is in the urban areas. In the urban areas, there are places to build multi-family units in large concentrations. It's been going on in San Jose. They've been having huge fights about it in San Francisco. It's going on in Berkeley. It's going on in some places in Oakland. And it's had this flip side. Unless you have certain affordability guarantee, it actually drives out the lower income people without a place to go. And so when I was on the city council, in 9 years, we had 700 units of affordable housing constructed in Santa Cruz, and we did all of the above. We had inclusionary housing. 20% of every housing project had to have affordable part of it. We had federal money that did a couple of large ones. We had city land that we donated to pencil out of affordable projects, land that doesn't exist in the same way. And so there's now this dogma that has captured a lot of the legislators in California, that single family zoning has been the sole cause of this because you haven't been able to do multifamily in certain places. And it has led to the desire to override local governments. It is really those two things.
Which is what brings me to the second part of this question, which is, I mean, Peter Douglas, the sainted Peter Douglas, was famous for saying that you can tell the effectiveness of the Coastal Act not by what has been done, by what hasn't been done. In other words, he defined his legacy by the absence of development along the coast. And I believe that the way it was put, one of I can't remember who was from the Coastal Commission, said the Coastal Act was passed because we didn't want every place to look like Malibu. Drive down Malibu, you can't see the ocean. But would Carmel be Malibu if there had never been a Coastal Act? I can't believe that it would be, because the people in this community have always been sensitive to these kinds of questions, and yet their hands were tied in terms of needed development as much as anyone's. And so if state regulations are partly or largely responsible for the lack of development in the state for the last 50 years, and Gavin Newsom must have been talking about that at least in part. I mean, Jerry Brown, sequel reform is the Lord's work. He meant more development, right? Isn't that?
And I worked for him for 8 years and he couldn't do it.
They couldn't do it because the legislature was in the way. But why isn't the solution, if overregulation is the problem, why is the solution to give all these mandates to the local agencies, one-size-fits-all mandates, instead of removing some of the strictures and letting the local agencies, the cities and counties, decide for themselves what they need and how to do it? Why didn't the legislature just say, we'll get out of the way for 20 years? Wouldn't that be another way to solve this problem?
Yes, but you have to have some accountability for knowing that housing will be built.
But the accountability is that the city council in Carmel and the board of supervisors answers to the people. That's the accountability. That's what you also represent the people. What the people of small towns expect for you to do is to see the wisdom, occasionally, of getting Sacramento to back out of the way and go back to the 1970s when the cities and counties were too much in favor of development. That's the way it was seen in Sacramento. And let them have some of that autonomy back. Anyway, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Well, no, I think the rap comes back the other way. which is that places that are very expensive housing markets are really exclusive and they want to keep people out. And as a result, when we try to do certain things, when you have one size fits all fits 480 cities, that is an argument that is made by the YIMBYs, yes, in my backyard, the people that are ascended in all the housing. That's just people from wealthy areas that want to keep people out when we really have this 3 million shortage. And the real thing to do is try to figure out a way to develop some housing as the best defense. I've been saying this for 20 years. And the other thing is the state, the place the state has backed away is there's not a housing shortage in some cities for market rate. There's only a shortage in affordability. But there is not any kind of cash subsidy or anything that helps projects pencil out at the affordable level. There's density bonuses. You can build more units if you're multifamily in a way that allows you to provide some affordable. And when I was in the legislature the first time, from 2002 to 2008, Governor Schwarzenegger wanted a huge infrastructure bond, $56 billion, and we leveraged in affordable housing so that we could provide money to people that wanted to build it, to provide actual units, because that's not happening now. And I thought the way to work through that is when we had the surplus is to take money and put it toward the affordability. And yet at the time, you see, the 423 that you mentioned that has the coast in it, that was not the focus for the rest of the state. The focus was there was this monumental union fight. Yeah. And the housing for nonprofits had been required to be skilled and trained, which basically means union wages. And for nonprofit housing providers, they were not penciling out. And so the carpenters broke with the building trades and said, we don't really care. If it's sort of just at the level of being skilled, we don't care if they're in the union, we don't care if it's project labor. And the building trades and the labor federation strongly opposed it. And that was the dispute that everybody else was looking at while the coastal one entered our way through. And some of us tried to litigate the coastal one. And if you could get through that labor one, then we could advocate for a lot of money going to the affordability to pencil out the projects that might be 80% market rate and have the money that allows them to guarantee the 20% affordable and then allows thousands of units to be built and address this issue. There's a lot more to be said. What about letting
mandates? What about letting local control take back have the responsibility for providing housing and deciding how much should be built? You're from a small town.
Yeah, I mean, my experience as a small town council member is that cities don't build housing, right?
No,
and so you still
private owners will build housing.
absolutely. So you still need ways to attract developers who are interested in developing in your community in ways that your community is interested in having development. Much of what I heard when I was on city council, and I won't claim to be an expert in this, was that when redevelopment funds went away, that was really a hit to cities, that it was hard to get sort of older downtowns redeveloped at that point. Those are a prime place for affordable housing, multifamily housing, what they call affordable by design housing, mixed use projects done, is to infuse money into those downtown corridors and sort of redevelop in ways that the community already sees housing should be or some kind of development should be. So I think there are ways. I much prefer to see the state support and infuse support into our localities than to layer on what you're calling these one-size-fits-all. We kind of talked about 423 and how difficult that issue was to navigate. I actually ended up not supporting Assembly Bill 423 and the Senate Bill 423. The main reason that I didn't support it was that part of it allows streamlining, but if you do 9 units or less, you don't have to have any affordable units in there. And so to me, it was very important that if the state was going to allow any streamlining, if local governments were giving up any control, that we get something back for that. And in my opinion, what we really need back for that is that affordable, low income, very low income, and moderate income housing that we really do. I would have to agree with the senator that there are single family homes being built. There are very expensive single family homes being built in our state, but not enough affordable development.
And you don't see state laws like CEQA and the Coastal Act as being one of the main causes of that?
You know, to me, CEQA and the Coastal Act is what allows community input, and it allows folks to give their input on where and how things should be built. One of my concerns around the coastal zone is if we get rid of, say we get rid of CEQA, we get rid of the Coastal Act, you may build in places, it might look like Malibu, and maybe 30 years ago, the main problem with that would be, we would say, well, it's overbuilt here. We don't want to look like Malibu. Now the problem is that we're facing sea level rise, we're facing coastal erosion. These are not necessarily safe places to build, and I do think CEQA and the Coastal Act helps us move through some of those pieces
But
in a
that
way.
explains why the local cities and counties shouldn't be able to decide these things on their own.
No, but you were asking, should we just get, should we just
Well,
get
no,
rid of
no, let me
CEQA
go right
and
at that.
let
Let the cities and
them
counties
decide?
decide, that's the question I'm
Well,
asking.
well, no, if the cities and
Instead of
counties.
Scott Wiener deciding the question.
Well,
That's all, a conversation for a different day.
Yeah, because I've been avoiding saying his name, but I quoted him 3 times. But I think the difficult thing is that if you just let cities and counties decide, and we have 3 million housing units short and not much is being built, that is not going to deal with the political forces in Sacramento that are sort of guiding some of this. And I think when you go back to it, it is like how some of this is being done. We talked about it, but in Santa Cruz, it seems to be stalled. But there was a bill passed before we were there that allowed certain by right things. And so there's this proposed 5-story by right building that backs on to people's backyards of single family. The sun will set at 11 in the morning for some people that are there. And my spouse had open studios this weekend. And an old friend of mine came by and said, yeah, we lived in that street, we got out. And that shouldn't be happening. That level of by right should not be happening. And there was another one that was enacted. I was in the cabinet, and even though I wasn't in the legislature, on behalf of Morgan Hill, I went into the governor's office and went to the author of the bill because it was going to blow up how much you could build in a year. And Morgan Hill had this growth management that they re-upped 3 times for 15 years. And in a counterintuitive way, it built all the market rate housing, but they leveraged all this stuff to build more than the required affordable housing. So this bill passed, and now they're building a little more housing in Morgan Hill and a lot less affordable housing. And I approached and said, you need to carve out, you need something that addresses this issue. And I couldn't get traction. Author wanted to do it, and then the governor's office said no. And sometimes it is trying to, if you're going to do by right, the sun can't set in the morning in a house. You can't blow up a thoughtful growth management that actually is allowing growth, but was requiring affordable housing. And the tough thing is that if there were to be nothing, that is the challenge among all the urban legislators in Sacramento, as they say, no, we're not going to let no housing be built.
Sure.
And so you have these things rush at you, and you have to decide.
No,
how to navigate it.
the answer is political realities. It's a perfectly good answer. I mean,
Yes, but
you
I
have to
think,
deal with
but I
the-
can speak for the people here. The political reality in Carmel is very different than the political reality in downtown San Francisco.
Of course, no, we understand. Yeah, that's
I'm glad you understand.
I mean, no, your answer is, it makes sense that the answer is because we have to deal with the political realities in Sacramento. So let's go.
But I'll just finish the point when it comes to CEQA and the Coastal Act. I mean, you know, building in some of these areas is not necessarily the best from an environmental perspective, not just because it's sensitive habitat, but when you're dealing with flood zones, coastal erosion, effects of climate change, we have to be very careful around where we build, because in the end it can end up being even more expensive. When you have homeowners who may not be able to get flood insurance or fire insurance, that's a burden on the rest of us. And so when I think about CEQA, when I think about the Coastal Act, it takes on brand new meaning. It may have come in the 70s because people didn't want all of California to look like Malibu, but now it has a completely different meaning when we think about the effects of the climate crisis. And so, you know, when you ask that question, to me, there's much more wrapped up in this than just local control.
Okay, let's go to some of the questions that were submitted by the people in the audience. Here's one, this is a good one, I think. I didn't verify the statistic. The person said only 6% of California's land is developed. I don't know if that's true, but it's a small percentage. It's a big state, most of it's empty. Why not use some of that vacant land to solve the housing crisis instead of foisting it on historic, built-out communities like Carmel-by-the-Sea?
Let the former Secretary of Natural Resources speak to that for a second. Of the forest land in California, 58% is federal and 3% is state. And that is a substantial percentage of what you just did. And it is not developable. And it is not on the table. And so then when you get to what is developable, everything that is logical has mostly been taken. You're on a slope, you're in a floodplain, you're in a place that's going to be swamped if the seas come up by even a foot or two. We already have 25% of California's population living in high fire hazard zones. I led a tour last Wednesday and Thursday to the back of Fire at Paradise, to the town of Greenville that completely burned down. That Dixie Fire was 900,000 acres. And, you know, and Dawn mentioned fire insurance. That is a crisis for us. And it is really due to a lot of people have built in places that probably aren't going to be sustainable over time. So the real thing is it's trying to have a higher density in the existing urban footprint. And in doing that, the most logical place to do it is the places that are densely populated. It's where there's declining enrollment schools. It's where people don't have
and
to
are you
live.
including a place like Carmel when you say that?
No.
Okay.
I don't consider this
The
like a
census
highly
bureau,
urban area. You know, but in San Jose, if people are driving from Salinas to San Jose, or Santa Cruz to San Jose, if you have the jobs in intense urban development, where there's declining enrollment schools, where you're not having people commuting from Manteca every day, you're dealing with transportation, housing, and they have the water now. There is not, you know, I spent last year trying to get the water board to revise the Carmel River order just to allow Monterey to build 2 projects. One was completely affordable, and you couldn't get it done. Looking at there's atmospheric rivers, we can, and I think that's it is. And the other thing is, to the question, there's 3 million acres of irrigated agricultural land, and we're the top ag producing land in the state, and the pressure is to pay that over and to do it, and that's not a good idea.
Well, but we have a big piece of land here just to the north called the former Fort Ord, which I don't think has any of the problems you just mentioned. It's not a big high fire danger area. There's no water shortage there, and it is not ag land. None of those things apply, and yet Carmel Valley, Carmel, these quaint areas which have been protected by state law all these years are being told, start adding apartments now. Why not build them at Fort Ord instead? Okay, why not sponsor a law then that says the housing mandate for Carmel-by-the-Sea is lifted, we're moving it to Fort Ord. Why don't you do that?
Well, let's go, this takes us right back to the Carmel Chamber of Commerce. And John, do you want to say something before I do this? Am I talking too much? You want to say something?
I love listening to you.
Well, I got into trouble at the Carmel Chamber of Commerce for answering that question.
But seriously.
No, I'm serious, because the answer is what it is. I think, in a very controversial point of view, that the RENA system is not going to work over time.
What system?
The regional housing allocation system. Because I think cities and counties have been assigned more housing units than they will realistically be able to.
That's certainly true here in most of
And
my.
what it's gonna be, except for a few urban areas, of the 21 cities I have, there's only 2 that are coming close, Gilroy and Morgan Hill. And,
Both places with plenty of land.
well, within their existing urban footprint.
Right.
They're not taking eggplant to do it.
No, I get
And so the thing about it is I think there's gonna be a point, and this is what I got misinterpreted, I think there's gonna be a point that that's not working, and that's not clear. And everybody has to make a good faith effort to build a housing to that point. And then that's when I think that people that are more hardline now are gonna be more open to flexibility. And that's the way to get there. I would be
Please tell me
surprised.
as soon as you think that has happened.
I think when,
No, so let's shift gears then, because, and just keep trying to, I'm trying to keep the.
I'll respond to this.
Okay.
I mean, I'll respond to
You know Fort Ord, yeah.
I do know Fort Ord, and have been in many conversations on this topic. I do think there is building that is happening at Fort Ord, so we'll continue to be building at Fort Ord. I think the Monterey Peninsula, as we all know, has particular water challenges that we need to solve, some of those related to building at Fort Ord. But I would say just in terms of building in Carmel, and perhaps the RENA numbers are too large for Carmel. That's what I'm hearing loud and clear from this audience, and I think that feel free to clap. Message here. The only one thing that I would
Well, I don't know if they're too big or too small, but I just really, I'm listening to the people who say, why can't we decide?
Exactly, and I totally get that. The only, the one thing I would say is, and the senator mentioned declining school enrollment. What I have seen in many of the communities, he represents over 20 cities, I believe he said, I represent 15. And what we're seeing across this district is a change in demographic of the population. And so and across California really, right? By 2030, I think it's 25% of the population is supposed to be 60 and above. In Santa Cruz County, it's higher, it's 30% of the population. We have elementary schools with declining enrollment, and we have the face of our communities is starting to change. So, and our communities are aging, frankly, which is okay, but it really causes a lack of diversity in terms of age groups and income brackets, and it's all related to this lack of housing, where young families really struggle to move into places across our communities, or frankly, I believe all of us want them.
Well,
And so, when we talk about local responsibility, I do think it's important for us to be having thoughtful conversations around how will we bring those families into the community, and what is it that we can do, and if it's not these RENA numbers on a local level, then what is it? And we should not stop ourselves by saying, bad state, good us, but we should push that conversation to say, if we can't get in Carmel to 349 units, what can we get to, and how are we going to diversify our communities for the health of all of us, for our communal health and our communal future?
Well, it's been a constant topic, filling places for teachers and firing police, even police chiefs. I mean, we've had that problem here forever, and it's the obstacle has been CEQA and the Coastal Act have been the things that have prevented any thoughtful planning for new development anywhere around the Monterey.
but I think,
You go ahead and say, I'm going to build an apartment building down there.
No, but one of the things-
laugh you out of the
one of the things we did in the last 2 years with the surplus is I was community college trustee for 8 years. I was elected assembly in 2002. I never heard of a homeless community college student. Now, in the community college at campuses in my district, the estimates are between 1% and 5%. In a community college, where supposedly people are living with families or community-based. So we put $3.5 billion over 2 years, and we started with 2, into doing higher education housing for the first-time community colleges, because that would help with the rental market in that. And so Gavilan is coming in with a 600-unit one, and they have a range, which is in southern Santa Clara and San Bernardino. Cabrillo and UC Santa Cruz have been funded for a 624-unit one. And I was talking to the people on the peninsula, and I didn't understand why they weren't applying. This would be the ideal thing for Fort Ord, where there's water, and this would be the ideal thing for dealing with the rental market and other things. And a lot of times, when I was resources secretary, our water policy was all of the above. Couldn't do it alone by conservation, couldn't do it alone by dams, desal, water recycling, managing the groundwater. You had to do it all. And in housing, it is very similar. And so I have met with the presidents of the colleges and said, there's going to be a little left, but if I have my way before I'm done, there'll be other rounds. Would you be ready to apply for a housing project?
And you talked to NBC about this?
Yes, I talked to the new president on his 12th day. He was grounding himself in the issues, because it seems to me you have to do everything, and that's going to be just one of the many things that's going to lessen some of the housing.
And on this note, to add to this, that's part of why when we did housing legislation, we specifically did housing legislation to support the community colleges to be able to bypass a government, state government agency so that they could get their projects done. We were hearing from community colleges that were getting the money, wanted to do housing, and then they would hit this bottleneck that the CSU and the UC system were not having to deal with this particular state agency. And so it's a real issue when we talk about all of the above for housing, that the community college housing and student housing plays a role, clearly not here in Carmel, but is a piece of that solution.
All right, let's go into a very similar topic, which is, if this new dense housing is going to be built, what guarantees do we have that blue-collar workers or teachers, firemen, police officers, that kind of people will be able to live there? How do we know it's not just, in a community like this, not just going to be taken in by rich second home or vacationers from Silicon Valley?
It depends, I mean, in my answer, it depends on the development and how many units are developed and under which law they're developed. So I mentioned 423, the reason I wasn't able to support 423, even though a lot of work was done on that bill, and there were a lot of things I liked in it. But if you do 9 units or less under that bill, you don't have to have any affordable housing. And so it depends, and my answer is it depends on how many units there are, what's required for affordable. And so there's not always a guarantee. The data has shown, though, that the predecessor of SB 423, which was SB 35, did produce affordable units. So the mix that was required there actually did produce affordable units. And so if something is done under that bill, there is a high likelihood that affordable units will be created.
I would answer your question by saying it should be part of the law, if that's happening, that there is a requirement for a certain measure of it, because it's tough to be meddling anyway, but you shouldn't do it unless there's a public purpose like that. Now here's what comes back at us all the time, that there's a 3 million shortage, and what you should do is just build as much housing as you can, and over time that will lower the shortage and therefore lower costs. And I think that's a pipe dream, because if you're 3 million short, and maybe we've exceeded it the last 2 years, but the most housing units built in a year in California in recent years have been 250,000.
Yeah.
So if you're doing that, you don't get to that for 20 years or 30 years. And what happens to everybody that's caught in between in terms of affordability, and what happens to the community impacts while that's happening without affordability?
So there's no mechanism now for these small projects to be reserved or dedicated to certain income groups or so forth?
There is
Well,
a
it depends on what legislation is used for those projects. I guess another way to do that, is for cities to look for those nonprofit housing developers that are really focused on affordable housing and see, and work with those developers as a way to develop the units that are going to help meet your RENA numbers. So to make sure that by design, the developers you're working on are, have that funding and are focused
Yeah, because if
specifically
you
on
have
that.
very high land costs like we have around here, how can you get an affordable condominium unless you go up?
Well,
Right.
and that has to do with those density bonuses, right? If you do a certain amount of affordable housing, you can add more units, you can go up. Some of that has to do with the city planning and height limits. I will say, in Morro Bay, because we were working with a nonprofit affordable housing developer, we were able to get 100% low and very low income project done, and that's guaranteed affordable.
if there's land.
If there's land.
What kind of land was that nonprofit development?
That was, I want to say it was city land, but I didn't
So
have
free
to look.
land.
Well, and input from the city. I mean, we put $500,000 in through, fees and tax breaks and other things.
I mean, with the costs in California now, it's even hard to
Exactly.
see how you could get affordable housing with free land. But it certainly.
Well, the voters in Santa Cruz last year passed a school bond for other things, and they have 78 units of housing included because they can bring the land.
4 teachers.
Yeah, 4 teachers or school employees, because they are having trouble hiring because they can't. And one other thing, just as an aside, because, provided I come back, I'm getting Salinas next year, so I was meeting with Chief Stud of Affordable Housing, and they have a 66-unit project, and they finished it, and PG&E was telling them it's gonna be, 8 months or 10 months to hook up the electricity.
Yeah, that's one of my infrastructure.
So I got involved. I got a very nice voicemail the other night saying, thank you, you were successful, you come help hand out 66 keys.
And this was from Chispa you're talking
In
about?
Chispa.
Where is this project?
That project is somewhere in the Salinas area, I think.
So,
But it's happening everywhere.
but you mentioned, excuse me, that Santa Cruz is had approved building 10 stories, I think you said, or did you just say?
Yes, they've approved 8 stories and they've got a 12-story in front of them.
12 stories in Santa Cruz.
Yeah, 12-story, and it's this complex with a warriors arena. And there is
Santa Cruz.
yes, and there is a referendum ballot measure that just turned into signatures to have a height limit in St. Yeah, that's clearly not somebody from Santa.
I think that project that they're building now at Fort Ord, by the movie theater there, that's supposed to be a working class community with the apartments. I think that's 3 stories, but I can't think.
When you see you mentioned Fort Ord and the building, and today we've been tag teaming, but I met today with the Marina Water District.
Okay.
And then I met with the groundwater management agencies, and then I met with the pure water people. And
All today?
All today.
As did I, in different orders.
Yeah, this is, we did a ceremony in Las Vegas.
Well, you guys are doing extremely well.
But and there was a lot of discussion between the meetings about how the allocations were done at Fort Ord and how they were either able or not able to be used. And Monterey had a small limit, and some of the others had different limits, and Marina was trying to leverage other things with the water district, and so I sat for the Fort Ord Rios Authority as an ex officio member when I was in the assembly, but I don't think when Fort closed down, they assigned water, the Army did, to everybody that had a jurisdiction there. And I just got the impression from some of the meetings today that the water doesn't totally line up right for what some people want to do.
That there's actually going to be a shortage there.
Well, there's actually Seaside and Marina, it sounds like have used their entire allocation already. Monterey has a small amount but unused. Delray Hills has a small amount that's unused. UC for the MBES Center has a bunch of water. And so it's a question of, is the water exist in any of the right places?
Well, let's go to infrastructure then, because since you're talking about that. I mean, infrastructure is required for people. And if all of these new housing units, let's just start with freeways. If 250,000 housing units are being built were built in California last year, and there's going to be more, is the legislature thinking about road capacity? Where are all those people's cars going to go?
Yes, but the legislature was this year thinking a lot about public transit and transit.
Yeah, but that
To be
lags
able
way
to-
behind, doesn't it?
It does, but there's actually lots of construction in urban areas that's going, art extensions and tunnels for trains and all this stuff, which once again sort of mitigates for doing a bunch of this in the urban area because that's where.
Well, sure.
Well, no, you see, because there was another bill in the legislature that I'm not sure made it all the way in its original form, which was to relieve parking requirements from certain houses.
Well, that's one of the big issues in Carmel, where parking is already a nightmare. And all of these units, where we have, how many, 50 ADUs that have already been approved, I believe it is, or most have been built, but there's no parking requirement for them. And this has always been one of the biggest impediments in Carmel to development, was the parking requirements. So, is waiving parking requirements the way to improve communities, or what do you think about that?
Well, it's a one-size-fits-all thing again.
Yeah, there you go.
You know, and it's like, I'm sure, you know, in certain communities, it's not an issue. If you were doing it in my neighborhood in Santa Cruz, with Students Park, and you do it in certain places in Carmel, or you do it where there are certain tourism impacts, it's a real issue.
I think there's sort of an aspirational thinking behind getting rid of parking, which is, you know, one day we're not all going to be in our cars. One day we're all going to have public transportation. One day there's going to be driverless cars that go around and pick us up, and there's going to be this automation. And I have personally been very concerned about this issue because I keep thinking, and you know, that might work in an LA or in a San Francisco, but in the very, very rural Central Coast where there's not a lot of infrastructure, it's very difficult to get around. It's difficult to get to your doctor, it's difficult to get to school, it's difficult to get to the grocery store if you're not able to drive. And so I don't personally think getting rid of parking is the way that we want to go. I do think it will turn many of our neighborhoods into places that most of us have moved to the Central Coast because we don't want to be in places where there's huge parking issues. We don't want to be in places where the freeways are crowded. I can say, you know, from our office's perspective, and Senator Laird was to help with this, we were just at Moss Landing today presenting $1 million check to help with the Highway 1 corridor there, thinking about this issue around infrastructure and around freeways and around climate change and what we're going to need to do with our infrastructure of the future. And as we add housing, I had this very interesting conversation with somebody from Tampsey who brought up this very concern. As we build more housing, how are we planning into our infrastructure and making sure that our infrastructure can handle this? And I asked him, so where would you put that in the process? Because already there is a process by which communities can work with developers for community benefits and for infrastructure kind of improvements. And he said, well, I really think it should go into the city's general planning. And for cities to be thinking about, and this is not me, this is a transportation expert saying to me, I really think that cities, as they're planning for growth in the future, should be thinking about what that looks like in their general plan. So it was a really interesting conversation. But since you asked, does the legislature think about infrastructure, I will also say the senator and I started the Central Coast Caucus, which is a group of 10 legislators that have come together from Santa Cruz to Ventura counties because of this issue that urban areas do have more legislators. What it takes me to get 500,000 people, and the senator's district is even larger with 1 million people, it takes me 3 counties, 200 miles of coastline, but 6,000 square miles of a district just to get 500,000 people. I have colleagues in LA who say I can jog my district. It's that tiny, and so there's that many more of them. So we started the Central Coast Caucus, and one of the very first things we did was advocate for Highway 101 projects in any of the 5 counties, knowing that the health of the Highway 101 in any one of the counties is going to benefit all of us to keep goods moving and to keep people moving. So it is very much on our minds, I will say, caucus minds, and I think it's something we're going to have to continue to talk about as we confront this aspiration to get people out of commutes and into communities. That's the aspiration, but there's some realities that rural communities really have to deal with in a different way, and I think the conversation is there. We've certainly been uplifting it.
No, okay, let me ask you about PG&E then, because we have at least one homeowner in Carmel told me recently that they have been waiting a year to get a PG&E hookup. So all this housing, was that cat house?
2.5 years.
2.5 years, okay, pardon me.
And there's places, I'll just say, there's places, a colleague of mine represents up in the Eureka area, and they've been waiting 7 to 9 years.
Okay, so isn't all this new housing going to make it worse? I mean, what is the legislature?
Well, I'm amazed I haven't heard from that person, but
You will.
we were, even today, there was somebody that had an ADU that had been in the process for a year and now was going to.
Because of PG&E?
Yeah, not gonna hook it up for 8 months. I had somebody call me about an emergency well permit. It's an emergency well, a year. Originally, the Chispa project was a very long period of time out. I had an own personal experience with an art studio that's an ADU that we have built. And so it is happening, and I'm just calling PG&E, and you see it is a real tough thing because
It's already a regulated utility, so.
yes, and we're trying to gradually get people to move to electrify everything, and then people in the Santa Cruz Mountains are saying to me, let me get this right. The power goes out all the time, and you want us to rely on electric cars, our wells rely on electricity. You have to call 911. And I hate to say it, but over time we do need to move to electricity, but we have to have enough, and it has to be reliable. And we work with PUC just because there were certain places in the atmospheric rivers where the power was out for days, and the requirement now was that they only had to have a backup for cell phone and other things for 8 hours, and now the PUC has moved it to 72. And we're kind of worried because that's not a testable wall, that's them firing up a diesel generator or something. That's sort of unclear on the concept. And we're going to have, if we are going to electrify, whether it's housing or wells or all these things, it's going to have to be reliable. It's going to have to be in an adequate amount.
We've had power outages here where the cell phones also went out, which was.
Yes.
I have an employee sitting over here that I can't remember where he drove to be able to do our work, but it was not anywhere near.
Okay, what
And
now?
we hear, I'll just say, all over this district, we hear about this issue. The Chispa housing is one of them. There's a couple projects in San Luis, one in particular that's sitting empty right now, that can't get people housed. It's an affordable housing development that's waiting on PG&E. I visited a shelter where it's those pods that people can be sheltered in, and they weren't able to get online. Part of it is the backup. Part of it is the supply chain issues. And so, there is a part that PG&E needs to hurry up, but there is another piece of this that has to do with supply chain issues. That's going to be a much harder problem to solve. I'm part of a working group on the assembly side that is working to push what they call the investor-owned utilities, the PG&Es, the SoCal Edisons of California, to get going on this. And then we did pass legislation to try to add some accountability around what we call connectivity, or being able to get your projects connected to the grid, basically. And so there is a lot of emphasis on this piece of things, especially as rates are going up, with ensuring that people can bring their projects online.
Yeah, and of course, the prices have been going up a lot as well. What about our local water supply? We can't have housing without water, and I assume you know something about the bizarre history of water in the Monterey Peninsula, where we've had, in many areas, a permit moratorium in place since 1995.
Well, I was just at Pure Water Monterey this morning celebrating. They just got a WIFIA loan and EPA loan,
Yeah.
and so they're going to be breaking ground on their expansion.
Okay, so are you guys confident that that's gonna supply the water we need for the housing that we're required to build in Carmel Valley?
You're asking me if I'm confident of something about Monterey water?
Yeah. I know.
The thing about it is a year ago right now, and I apologize because it wasn't in the Pine Cone, I wrote an op-ed saying, here's a framework for water reliability across Monterey and county, and it's gonna cause people to have to be interested in areas they're not and stand down. It was the dams need to have the things replaced. San Lucas needs to have a clean water. The water recycling plant needs to be built out. There probably, I thought at the time, needed to be a smaller desal plant that needed to be in public ownership and take care of marinas issues. And that really, if you looked at all of this, that people were feuding over the source water, people were feuding over desal, people seem to be complacent about the San Lucas thing. There can't be moving off the dime on the dams. The groundwater, all the miscellaneous valleys that have to be brought to sustainable levels. And there's only two ways people cut what they water, or they add water supply, or they're a little efficient in a way they're not now. And that at the time, everybody was feuding. People didn't want to give enough water to Pure Water Monterey. The dams were like, just write us a check for $160 million and had no plan to do it. There was a fight over the groundwater management.
So what is the answer for us?
Everybody has to give a little and make sure that there's a sustainable water supply for the whole county where everybody has a piece of it. And right now, everybody sort of wants to do what they want to do in their corner and not have a give and take.
So are you saying we do need a desal plant or we don't?
I said we need a smaller one in public ownership that takes care of Marina, the one that was approved to sort of meet all those conditions.
What do you think about that?
Well, I think you're right when you say we do need leadership. So, and to me, that entails a couple pieces. One is supporting the entire community from a state level in increasing water supply. And I think, we talked about housing needs to be in everything on the table. To me, water needs to be in everything on the table, and it can include desal, it can include water reclamation. When I was on the city council, we did a $165 million water reclamation project, but that was only possible with state help, with state revolving fund loans, with state grants, with federal loans. And so when I say we need leadership, we're going to need to be able to support communities in getting the projects done that they want to get done. I absolutely agree with this idea of collaboration. But I'll add to this that we also need our state agencies working together. And so I'll be meeting with the HCD, the Housing and Community Development, along with State Water Resources Board, and I'm sure Senator Laird has done this as well, to talk about this pressure that communities are under. On the one hand, you have housing mandates, build more housing. On the other hand, you have stop build orders. You can't build housing because there's not enough water. And so,
We're familiar with those.
exactly. And so as the community is working on the projects, I do think we need state funding and state grants and state loans. And it's our job in the legislature to keep funding those things to make sure that funding's accessible. But we also need to be conveners of these agencies to get them on the same page when it comes to having conflicting regulations for communities.
Can I?
Well, let me do one quick.
I was just asking, Graham?
We've got 2 more minutes. So.
Okay, let me do one quick add. And that is as I said earlier, the order on the Carmel River couldn't be amended for Monterey to have affordable housing. I have asked the water board to come down and do a workshop.
You're talking about the state water
Yeah,
resources.
whose order it is.
Yes, I am.
On a path to lifting that order. Tell us what the path is, given what's been approved, what's there.
Okay, last question. What do you think about this Our Neighborhood Voices ballot measure that they're collecting signatures for the November 2024 ballot, which they say would restore local control over housing supply? You know what I'm talking about?
I know what you're talking about.
What do you think about it?
I think it's gonna have trouble in the other parts of the state.
Okay.
We pass overwhelmingly here.
Yeah, and in Santa Cruz.
I can't tell anymore.
What do you think about it?
I think Monterey is very similar to Carmel-by-the-Sea. I mean, of course, I support what the voters want. If something makes it on the ballot, you know, we're a democracy. Everybody has the right to vote for these things. I do think it's going to be a hard sell in some parts of the state where it's so palpable for people, and there's really a desire. People are begging, really, please come and make the decisions instead of having them be made locally. Because
People always say that when they don't get their way local.
they say that, but I will just add this. There is a younger generation that wants to build wealth. They want to own homes. They want to live in places like this, and they feel like that they can't. And there's a real desire for change from a lot of folks. Are those the ones going to the polls? I'm not sure, but I can tell you that it's very, very palpable. And I said it at the beginning, and I think it's incumbent, it's the responsibility of all of us in this room to think about where are our kids and our grandkids going to be able to live? And if not this, then what? We cannot stay stuck in this us versus them, state versus local, me versus you. We have to come together to think more collaboratively around what is the next generation going to do in California, because it's palpable that they are not building the same kind of generational wealth that many people in this audience have been able to build, and they want to. And it's our responsibility to lead, as you say, and to be those kind of leaders that creates that
And
plan.
as a closing comment, they come to a lot of legislative hearings and say, you don't care about us.
Yeah.
That happens all the time.
Graham?
Thank you so much for your time this evening. Please give Don and Paul. We'd like to get you all back next year at this time to give us an update on where we are in these matters, and I'm sure you'll all make yourself available for that. Pardon me?
There'll be this minor election going on.
Well, we'll do it post-election. How's that? On behalf of the CRA, the City of Carmel-by-the-Sea, we do have a small gift, a token of our appreciation. Lula's Chocolate and the Carmel Honey Company, both locally owned companies, and we thank you for your time. We thank you all for coming this evening. Have a wonderful evening.